Welcome to a dark episode of Homerik. Today, we're going to talk about a little bit of history, and a dark history of that. Now, in my last video, I mentioned about the Salem witch trials, and talking about dark mythology, and how mythology itself has corrupted people and driven people to do horrendous things. Now, I may be a lover of dark nature, but I am not an evil person. I do have empathy for others. And so when I tell you this story is not a good one. This story is founded upon the bedrock of hysteria. I'm talking about the Salem witch trials. Before America became America, it was called the New World. And specifically, we're talking about colonial New England. A group of settlers known as the Puritans seceded from England to land in the New World to start a new life, free of the oppression from the king. By their name, the Puritans, they firmly believed in the concept of predetermination. Some people were destined to go to heaven, and the rest not. They brought back the root of what Christianity was trying to tell in the Bible to a literal text, as literal law, that their way of life was supposed to be simple, without sin, and made to work hard, and grow their own food, and take care of their own. Now, life was always hard in the New World. There was the fear of the natives attacking the new settlements, and an epidemic of smallpox. Not to mention, there were some rivalries against other townsfolk and townships. Salem Village was a shadow of Salem, the town, and it wasn't supposed to be an official village. It simply was a small settlement that the king signed, and I quote, unwillingly. The Salem witch trials occurred between Salem Village and Salem Town. Salem Village is now known as the modern-day Danvers, Massachusetts. And Salem Town is simply now just known as Salem in Massachusetts. In the beginning, before the witch trials happened, we must understand that supernatural forces were to be believed in everything that the Puritans did. And supernatural forces were believed to influence humanity for as long as we can remember. And witchcraft has been around since the 14th century. Of course, this was widespread as in New England. God and the devil were very real, and they were to be believed as having tremendous influential power. In January of 1692, two girls, one of Elizabeth Parris and Abigail Williams, were diagnosed by a local doctor of bewitchment. This was the initial grounds for the earliest witch hunts. From these two small girls, they accused three other witches: Tituba, a Caribbean slave to the Parris family; Sarah Good, who was a beggar on the street; and Sarah Osborne, an elder. Sarah Osborne and Sarah Good both denied involvement with witchcraft. However, Tituba confessed, but Tituba did not only confess herself. She gave out other names, and so the hysteria began. The first trials brought forth conspirators of Tituba like Martha Corey and Rebecca Nurse. Fun fact, Rebecca Nurse's house still stands in Danvers, Massachusetts, the original location of Salem Village. And as things carried on, In May of 1692, the justice system becoming overwhelmed with new witchcraft cases. It was then that Governor William Phips decided to announce a new type of court system dedicated to the involvement of witchcraft, where we had the Court of Oyer, which was to listen to the pleas, versus the Court of Terminer, to decide the fate of witches. And in 3 counties did we see these courts develop: in Suffolk, Essex, and Middlesex. And finally, in 1692, that June, we saw the hanging of Bridget Bishop, the first witch of Salem. Bishop was hanged at Gallows Hill, and after Bishop, 5 more were hanged. The following month, in August, we saw an additional 5 more witches hanged, and in September, 8 more witches were hanged. Not to mention that within that time, 7 witches died in the jail cells before they could even be hanged. And in defense of his wife, Martha Corey, her husband, Giles Corey, was stone-pressed to death. Stone pressing quite literally means stacking stones on top of you until it crushes your body and you cannot breathe and you suffocate until you die. It's a bad way to go. I recommend reading Young Goodman Brown, written by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Hawthorne, whose house still remains in Salem and is a pivotal landmark, tells of a man who goes into the woods of New England, afraid of the dark, who meets somebody suspicious. This suspicious person is thought to be a friend at first, and as young Goodman Brown proceeds into the forest, he finds evidence of witchcraft, and eventually succumbs to it, albeit that his friend was the devil. It's a tale of hysteria and how the fate of these people and the treacherous deeds that they would do to each other in order to make themselves look pure. A great tour to see in Salem is the House of Seven Gables, a house that is built since the 1600s and preserved by the community to show what life was like during those times. It's really cool. You actually go inside the house and you can see hidden passageways within the walls. Check it out. Turns out, actually, that same doctor that we mentioned earlier who said, this must be witchcraft. Well, we have toxicologists nowadays that show that there is a fungus that grows in, well, wheat, rye, and cereal and those kinds of products if it ferments too long. It's called ergot, and it can actually cause delusions, vomiting, and shaking of muscles, which people thought was you being corrupted by some sort of demon at the time. Not so much of a good doctor. But then again, you know, they didn't really have that knowledge. Still, like, if you're a doctor, like, what kind of a doctor are you to say, that's definitely it, even though I have no idea? Like, the ego. Come on. The fault of humanity. These trials were hugely biased. In Salem, you were guilty until proven innocent. That's how it worked. It wasn't like we have American politics now. And Cotton Mather was a minister who was greatly important in bringing down the continuation of the Salem witch trials. It was because of Cotton Mather insisting that witchcraft be treated and investigated as much as any other type of crime that Phips, the governor, took away the courts as they were and apologized to the community. Of course, this was not enough. Salem had already, the damage was done. Salem's tragedy was to be remembered for centuries to come. It was in 1692, that October, when the court of Oyer and the court of Terminer were disassembled or dissolved. And it wasn't until the May of 1693 where all the witches that were in prison were to be pardoned. And it took until 1697 for witch trials to be considered completely unlawful, and that spectral evidence was considered to be nothing more than superstition. These were not grounds to kill somebody. And it took until 1711 for the heirs of those witches to receive financial restitution for the price their family had to pay. Perhaps you may have read this book when you were in school. The Crucible is a story written by Arthur Miller, which describes the events of the Salem witch trials in 1692. And it was actually released as a sort of allegory to the anti-communist movement during the 1950s. I recommend taking a look into both Young Goodman Brown by Nathaniel Hawthorne and The Crucible by Arthur Miller. Both present striking stories of these events, these dark events, struck by the superstitious belief in the dark mythology of witchcraft. Should you be interested in this kind of content, please join us at Dark Mythology on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe and like this video here on YouTube. Let's keep this going. Thanks.